Tonight, more COVID restrictions in place as the Omicron variant spreads around the world. The new guidelines go into effect today for anyone flying into the U.S. And New York City expanding its vaccine mandates to all private sector workers and children as young as 5. Protests over restrictions turning violent overseas, police deploying pepper spray and water cannons. Also tonight, Jussie Smollett takes the stand. The disgraced actor denying any allegations he paid two brothers to carry out a racist and homophobic attack on himself. Smollett also testifying he had a friendly and sometimes sexual relationship with one of them. Plus, the key testimony in the Ghislaine Maxwell trial, a second alleged victim taking the stand, testifying about how Maxwell lured her and other young girls into the hands of Jeffrey Epstein. The disturbing details, including what she was forced to wear when interacting with the convicted sex offender. Olympics boycott. The U.S. will not send government representatives to the Winter Games in Beijing over China's human rights abuses. The historic announcement by President Biden and the scathing response from the communist superpower. Cuomo fallout. Chris Cuomo stepping down from his radio show today, just days after he was fired from CNN. The anchor accused of helping his brother as the New York governor faced sexual misconduct allegations. But now, Chris Cuomo facing accusations of his own. And state of emergency. Forecasters warning of potentially catastrophic flooding in Hawaii, plus the tornado damage across the South. Top story starts right now. And good evening, I'm Tom Llamas. We begin Top Story tonight with the pandemic, the U.S. and world expanding restrictions as the Omicron variant spreads. But an older mutation, the Delta, is still threatening healthcare systems. Omicron now confirmed in nearly 20 states. And starting today, anyone flying into the U.S. will have to show a negative COVID test taken within 24 hours of departure. New York City also expanding its COVID restrictions, now becoming the first U.S. city to require all private sector workers to be vaccinated. The new rule set to impact more than 184,000 businesses. The city also widening its indoor vaccine mandate to include children as young as 5. The Delta variant still responsible for nearly all new U.S. infections. And as Americans gather for the holidays, cases are climbing in nearly 24 states. One ICU in New Mexico now operating at 200% capacity. Miguel Almaguer leads us off tonight.
Tonight, with Omicron now discovered in nearly 20 states, the mayor of New York City is implementing the nation's most sweeping vaccine mandate for all private employers. By the end of this month, those who work in person must have at least one dose of a vaccine unless they qualify for an exemption.
We needed to do something bold quickly and get ahead of all of this.
With new testing restrictions also implemented today for all travelers entering the U.S., our nation is bracing for Omicron, but already facing a disaster set into motion by Delta.
I used to wake up crying because I thought I was going to die.
Like 99% of those infected with the virus, Vera Martinez-Ruiz, who isn't vaccinated, likely has Delta.
I never thought it would get me, and it got me. And it's really scary.
Martinez-Ruiz is lucky to be alive and just as fortunate to have a hospital bed. At the San Juan Regional Medical Center in Farmington, New Mexico, the ICU is over 200% capacity. More than half the patients in the building have COVID.
This is our 5th wave, and this is clearly the most severe wave that we've had to endure.
In need of a lifeline, this rural hospital is now getting help. An HHS National Disaster Medical Team has been deployed to assist overwhelmed staff. Typically used on the front lines of natural disasters, they're now needed for a growing crisis inside hospitals.
For some Americans, the pandemic is becoming an afterthought, but that's not the reality on the ground.
COVID is still very much here. These are very bad, very sad situations that oftentimes don't have a very good ending.
That is most true here in the ICU, where cameras have never been allowed before.
All of these rooms are full.
All of these rooms are full of intubated COVID patients.
Authorities want the public to see how dire the situation is.
A lot of the sickest patients that are on this floor won't make it out of this floor.
The grim reality of Delta is often overlooked, and for the sickest, the writing is on the wall. Scribbled on far too many doors here reads the words anointed by Father Tim. Patients who've been given their last rites because the end may be near.
All right, Miguel Almaguer with a very sobering look at what's happening in New Mexico tonight. Miguel, while these hospitals struggle with Delta, we are learning more about Omicron severity from Dr. Fauci himself.
Yeah, that's right, Tom. Scientists say it'll still be a few more days until we know more for certain. But Dr. Fauci says early indications point to a more contagious variant, but not necessarily one that's more severe. That would be good news for those HHS teams that have up to 10 units deployed every month. Tom?
All right, Miguel Almaguer leading us off tonight. As the Omicron variant spreads across the U.S. and around the world, here's what we know so far, because we know you have a lot of questions about Omicron. The first probably being, how transmissible is the Omicron variant? It's still very early, as the Delta variant still makes up about 99% of all the COVID-19 cases in the U.S. But a preliminary report shows that Omicron shares similar genetic material with the common cold, making it highly transmissible. All right, so the other question you may have is, are vaccines effective against Omicron? Well, in a new report out of South Africa, of those in the hospital, a majority were unvaccinated. As of now, Pfizer, Moderna, and Johnson & Johnson are all looking at their vaccines to see if they need to be updated in response to Omicron. So what do the symptoms or severity look like with Omicron infection? Early indications right now from reports in South Africa show Omicron may not be as severe as Delta. Many of those patients did not report a loss of taste or smell, something not yet seen in Delta. As health experts eagerly await more data on the Omicron variant, let's bring in Dr. Richard Besser. He's the CEO of the Robert Wood Johnson Foundation and a former acting CDC director. Dr. Besser, always great to have you here on Top Story. So we've seen Omicron now for a couple weeks. Dr. Besser, what's the one thing that surprised you so far about this variant?
Well, Tom, a couple things. One is how quickly it arrived on the scene, a variant that has that number of mutations. But in terms of what it's doing, I think one of the things that is pleasantly surprising me is the information coming out of South Africa that suggests it may not be as severe. It's too early to reach that as a final conclusion. But if it truly turns out to be less severe and is not filling up the hospitals in South Africa, that would really be an incredible benefit, because if it transmits very, very easily and is able to displace Delta, which is a quite severe strain, you could actually see some decreases in the number of people who have severe COVID infection.
Along those lines, Bloomberg spoke to some health officials in South Africa, as you were mentioning, and one said that if Omicron is highly contagious, but it doesn't cause severe disease, this could be the beginning of the end of the virus. Do you agree with that assessment?
Well, I have given up prognosticating on COVID, because whenever we feel that it looks like we're in the final stretch, it turns out the virus has a new plan for us. What really concerns me right now, Tom, is how much focus there is on the Omicron strain here in the United States, while more than 1,000 people are dying every single day from the Delta variant. And what I would like to see is that we double, we triple our efforts to reach people who haven't been vaccinated at all. And if every person watching you tonight reaches out to a friend or relative who isn't yet vaccinated at all and makes the case for why they need to do that to protect themselves and their family and the community, we would save a lot of lives.
It's a great point. Dr. Besser, finally, the big question in a lot of people's minds is holiday travel. Until we learn more about the variant, do you still think it's safe for people to travel throughout the United States and even overseas?
I think it depends on a couple things. One is, what is your true risk? So someone who is elderly, someone who has multiple medical conditions that puts them at greater risk, the risk of a vaccine not working as well means something different than someone who's at lower risk. The other piece of this is, what is your own comfort level with travel and with risk? If you're somebody where traveling during this period is going to give you more anxiety, more emotional stress, then don't travel. Wait another year. Wait till things calm down. But for me, I'm comfortable. I'm fully vaccinated and boosted, and my family, we are going to be traveling over the holidays, and I'm looking forward to that.
All right, Dr. Richard Besser for us tonight. Dr. Besser, we thank you for your time. We turn now to the trial of Jussie Smollett, the disgraced actor taking the stand as he faces new charges for the 2019 hate crime attack prosecutors say he planned and participated in. Today, Smollett testifying that he had a sexual relationship with the prosecution's star witness, but insisted the incident was not staged. NBC's Ron Allen is in Chicago tonight.
Nearly 3 years after Jussie Smollett first reported he was the victim of a racist and homophobic attack, the former Empire actor testifying in his own defense today, charged with 6 counts of felony disorderly conduct for allegedly faking the attack and lying to police about it. Smollett telling the jury there was no hoax. Smollett seen in this police body camera video wearing the noose he told investigators the attackers put around his neck.
You want to take it off or anything?
After yelling slurs, beating him, throwing bleach on him, and saying, "This is MAGA country." The prosecution's star witnesses, 2 brothers, aspiring actors, and associates of Smollett, who say he recruited them to stage the attack, paying them $3,500. Abimbola Asudario testified Smollett said, "He wanted me to beat him up." On the stand, Smollett insisting he paid the brothers for a diet and exercise plan, not to arrange a phony hate crime. Police using images from 4 dozen cameras to create a sequence of events, including showing the 2 brothers allegedly using $100 Smollett gave them to buy supplies for the attack. Tonight, Smollett insisting he's innocent.
All right, Ron Allen joins us now live from Chicago. Ron, can you describe the atmosphere in the courtroom when Smollett took the stand?
I think, Tom, people were just stunned to see that Jussie Smollett took the stand. Most observers of this trial felt like he had no choice other than to speak up and present his side of the story. This trial has emerged as sort of a stark contrast. Do you believe Smollett, or do you believe the others who say that he staged this whole thing? And at this point, he's taking the stand to try and clear his name. But the evidence against him seems to be considerable. The fact that, and that's what the prosecutors are trying to press in as they cross-examined him. They're trying to find examples of him not cooperating with the investigation, for example. But the bottom line is, will the jury believe him or believe police and prosecutors who say that he's an actor making this all up to try and create some positive publicity to enhance his own career?
Right, to get some buzz. Ron, while we have you, tell us more about the civil suit we've been hearing about. Smollett is being sued by the city. I think it's for about $130,000 in damages.
Essentially, yes. The police say that that's what they spent trying to invest this case that they say was a hoax. So when this criminal proceeding is over and Smollett faces up to 3 years in prison if convicted on these felony disorderly conduct charges, there's still this civil suit that's laying down the road that will come after the criminal matter is settled. So his legal troubles are far from over.
All right, Ron Allen from a chilly Chicago tonight. Ron, we thank you for that. Next, we turn to the ongoing trial of Ghislaine Maxwell, another alleged victim taking the stand, testifying that Maxwell lured her and other young girls to the homes of Jeffrey Epstein before entering them into sexual relationships with the convicted sex offender. And in one instance, Maxwell allegedly telling the victim to wear a schoolgirl uniform while serving Epstein tea. Kathy Park reports.
Tonight, disturbing new details in the trial of Ghislaine Maxwell, now entering its 2nd week. Another alleged victim taking the stand, going by the pseudonym Kate. She spoke about how Maxwell and convicted sex offender Jeffrey Epstein lured her and other young girls into sexual relationships with Epstein. Kate telling the courtroom Maxwell first invited her to her London home for tea, then to give Epstein massages that turned sexual. She added Maxwell thanked Kate, telling her she was such a good girl and so happy you were able to come. Kate testifying Maxwell never participated but set everything up, and adding she was terrified and frozen the first time she saw Epstein naked, with Maxwell standing right next to her.
Kate supports the fact that she's a monster, and that's why she's important. It's showing that Maxwell is intimately involved in getting these sex acts done. And making sure that they happen, and is integral to the entire conspiracy.
Today, the judge instructed the jury that Kate was 17 and over the age of consent when the alleged sexual contact occurred, meaning Maxwell is not charged with any crimes related to what happened. But Maxwell is facing 6 counts of human trafficking related to other victims. Kate also testifying she visited Epstein's Palm Beach mansion, where she said Maxwell gave her a schoolgirl outfit to wear consisting of a short skirt, white socks, and shirt, saying, "I thought it would be fun for you to take Jeffrey's tea in this outfit." Maxwell then handed her a tray, which Kate said she took to Epstein before engaging in sex acts near his pool.
Her entire defense is, oh, no, she's just a bystander. She didn't know anything about it. It's all just a complete misunderstanding. That becomes less and less credible the more people who get on the stand and talk about her intimate involvement in the everyday life.
Kate also telling the courtroom Maxwell was friends with numerous high-profile men, including Prince Andrew and former President Donald Trump, saying sometimes their names would just come up or she would be talking on the phone about them.
The other thing that she corroborates is the level of control that Maxwell had over the household. That's really important. That's part of what has to be proven.
All right, Kathy Park joins us now on set with what was one of the most graphic days in this trial so far. We know that alleged victim, Kate, who's using that alias, the name Kate, was also cross-examined by the defense. What did we learn?
Yeah, so we learned a few more details about her life. She came from a very well-to-do family. She lived comfortably. She was a model. She was featured in a lot of magazines. I think one of the most interesting revelations was the fact that she still stayed in touch with Epstein even after he was convicted in 2008. She admitted to writing emails to him while he was still in jail, even signing off on some of those emails, writing "Love always, Kate."
All right, Kathy Park with that new reporting tonight. Kathy, thank you. In Michigan tonight, the investigation into the parents of the suspect in that deadly high school shooting. They're now facing manslaughter charges after turning themselves in. And tonight, authorities have reportedly executed a search warrant on where they were staying before going to the police. Megan Fitzgerald has more on this developing story.
Tonight, new details about what the parents of the suspected school shooter were allegedly doing when police say they were on the run. Andre Shakura, who police say is a person of interest, now speaking to investigators. James and Jennifer Crumbly were found inside his art studio this weekend. Police say the Crumbleys had withdrawn $4,000 from the ATM. Shakura's attorney says his client didn't know they were fugitives, that the couple had asked for a place to stay because they were getting death threats.
They came in the morning and that Mr. Shakura left at 5 p.m. and basically asked them to lock up and leave, and they then overstayed into the evening, and Mr. Shakura had no idea and only found out the next day.
On Saturday, hours after the couple was captured, they appeared in court pleading not guilty to 4 counts each of involuntary manslaughter. They're accused of disregarding red flags prosecutors say could have prevented the deadly attack, including allegedly ignoring the school's warning the suspect was caught searching for ammunition online, and not mentioning their son had access to a gun when school officials showed them his disturbing drawing of a person shot and bleeding with the words, "The thoughts won't stop, help me."
These 2 individuals could have stopped it.
Defense attorneys say the suspect was not given access to the gun.
That gun was actually locked.
All right, Megan joins us now from Pontiac, Michigan, outside that jail. Megan, we heard there about the school officials possibly facing charges. What exactly will investigators be looking for to determine that?
Well, Tom, what we know is that they are going to be looking at the interactions that this 15-year-old suspect had with both students as well as administrators and teachers. We also know that they're going to be looking into every step that led up to this shooting and the hours, those critical hours leading up to this attack. This is still a very active and ongoing investigation, and the prosecutor, as you know, has been very candid in saying that it is possible that school officials could face charges here, Tom.
All right, Megan, we thank you for that. Now to growing tension on Ukraine's border with Russia. Tonight, President Biden preparing for a high-stakes call with Vladimir Putin as new signs suggest Russia may be preparing for an invasion. Chief Foreign Correspondent Richard Engel has more.
New satellite images tonight show Russian forces at the ready near the Ukrainian border. U.S. intelligence warned Russia's Vladimir Putin may be planning an attack on the U.S. ally. U.S. and Ukrainian officials estimate there are already 70 to 100,000 Russian troops near the border. An unclassified U.S. intelligence estimate predicts another 100,000 could be called in for a potential invasion early next year. President Biden has signaled to Putin the U.S. will oppose him.
I have been in constant contact with our allies in Europe, with the Ukrainians.
Analysts expect the U.S. would likely confront Russia with sanctions and not a full war on its border. Though in the past, sanctions have done little to change Putin's actions. Fears of war are growing in Ukraine. Back in April, during another Russian troop buildup, we were with Ukrainian troops who were carefully monitoring Russians on the other side.
What are you looking at through this periscope?
It's enemy.
Tonight, Putin may be bluffing. He does not want Ukraine to join NATO, and he doesn't want NATO to put advanced weapon systems into the country. Perhaps it's just saber rattling. Either way, the swords are drawn.
Tom, this is classic Russian brinksmanship. And if it is just a bluff, it is a very expensive one. It costs money to move all of these troops to the border. So if Vladimir Putin is just trying to send a message, he has certainly done that. But is he planning to do much more? U.S. officials say that Russia is also moving its troops close to the border and then pulling them back to keep the world guessing. Now, Presidents Biden and Putin have a video call tomorrow afternoon. The stakes are high. Tom?
And he no doubt has the world and the U.S.'s attention. All right, Richard, thank you so much for reporting tonight from Ukraine. For more on this military buildup, I spoke earlier with Ambassador Michael McFaul, who served as U.S. ambassador to Russia in the Obama administration and helped President Biden prepare for his June meeting with Putin. What do you think the U.S. does if he does invade?
Well, I think there'll be comprehensive sanctions, as there always have been before, but I think they'll be bigger than most than previous occasions. I think you might have Russia kicked out of SWIFT, which is a system between banks that allow transactions. But my own view is that they should say what they're going to do now as a way to credibly commit to doing it should he invade, and also as a way to convey to the Russian people what might happen to them and to their bank accounts and to their companies should Putin invade. I think it's a mistake to be quiet about those things. I think they should talk about it right now.
What do you think is different about this time? I mean, there's been a lot reported over the weekend, obviously the amassing of troops. Do you notice anything else different in Putin's approach?
Well, number one, the number of troops are much bigger, and they're coming from all different sides. I think that's important to underscore, including Crimea, by the way. Number two, remember in 2014, Putin had a pretext. Now, I radically disagree with it. I want to be clear about that. But there was the overthrow of President Yanukovych. He was an ally of Putin. And so Putin could say, well, I'm now striking back against those revolutionaries. He called them Nazis. And by taking Crimea and by supporting separatists in eastern Ukraine. Today, there's no pretext whatsoever. It's completely fabricated. The notion that Ukraine is joining NATO, that's not happening. The idea that you see in Russian press that Ukraine is trying to take back through military force its territory, that's a complete fabrication. And I think it's incumbent upon the West to keep underscoring that there is no pretext for action this time around.
Do you think Putin's just testing President Biden, or do you think there is more to this move?
I want to be clear. I don't know. And that's what I know Vladimir Putin pretty well. I met him first in 1991. I've written about him for 20 years. For 5 years, when I worked in the Obama administration, I dealt with him while President Obama and others were meeting with him, including Vice President Biden. I think it's important for people to understand that he likes to be uncertain. He likes to be unpredictable. And I'm sure that he has not decided whether he's going to use force or not. What he's trying to do now is to get guarantees from the West, from the NATO allies, that Ukraine will never be invited to join NATO. He's also trying to get the attention of the West. Look at us. We're talking about Putin today. We weren't talking about Putin last week, right? Look at what's happening tomorrow. He has a video summit with President Biden. He didn't have that 2 weeks ago. And in that regard, already the amassing of the troops have achieved some of his short-term objectives.
Ambassador McFaul for us tonight. Now to more attention for the Biden administration abroad. The White House sending a strong message to China today and announcing a diplomatic boycott of the Winter Olympics in Beijing, with the Games less than 2 months away. NBC's chief foreign affairs correspondent Andrea Mitchell has those details.
When the Olympic flame is lit in Beijing, American athletes will be there to compete. But neither President Biden nor any other U.S. officials will be attending. The White House announcing a diplomatic boycott of the Games to protest China's human rights abuses, including crushing the democracy movement in Hong Kong, threatening Taiwan, what the U.S. calls genocide against the minority Uyghurs, and the recent disappearance of tennis star Peng Shuai after she accused a top Beijing official of sexual assault. Human rights groups wanted a total boycott, as Jimmy Carter did in 1980, when he kept athletes home from the Moscow Olympics after the Soviets invaded Afghanistan. Others disagree. Senator Romney, is a diplomatic boycott the way to go? Some members of both parties want a complete boycott, including the athletes.
I don't feel that the burden of our international policies should fall on the shoulders of these young people. So let's make our statement loud and clear through not sending diplomats to Beijing.
Still, Beijing's response today immediate and furious, calling it an offense to China's 1.4 billion people. A spokesman saying, if the U.S. is insistent on going down the wrong path, China will take necessary and resolute countermeasures.
All right, Andrea Mitchell joins us now. Andrea, this decision by the White House obviously sends a very big signal to China. It sends a huge message to the sporting community around the world. But how is this playing around the globe, especially right there in Washington?
Well, it's mixed because some, certainly human rights groups, and some members of Congress want him to do more, want the president to say it's a complete boycott. It's back to 1980 and Jimmy Carter, and we're just not going to the Beijing Olympics because the genocide against the Uyghurs, the crackdown on the Hong Kong, of course, the threats against Taiwan, everything that China has done on human rights is just so outrageous. That said, as you saw, Mitt Romney in the piece, just interviewed him tonight, and he, of course, was so involved and identified with the Salt Lake City Olympics back when, and he said that all these athletes have worked so hard, they and their families, and of course the delay because of the pandemic, and to deny them the chance to compete is just not fair, and that we're sending a strong enough signal by not sending any American representatives, and China is, of course, threatening countermeasures. Let's see what they're going to do. But the fact that China does not even recognize human rights as an issue that they should be worried about is something that is so outrageous to Romney. And he put out a news release with Tim Kaine, the Democrat. So there is bipartisan feeling on both sides.
Andrea Mitchell with this dramatic buildup to the Winter Games tonight. Andrea, thank you. Still ahead tonight, more fallout for the Cuomo brothers. Chris Cuomo stepping down from his radio show days after he was fired from CNN. And tonight, the new sexual harassment allegations he's facing, plus vaccine mandate protests turning violent, the new images of demonstrators clashing with authorities across Europe, at one point invading a Christmas market, and the major announcement from K-pop group BTS, why the global superstars are taking a break from the spotlight. Stay with us. Top story just getting started. Back now with new details on that bombshell firing over the weekend at CNN. The network's top primetime anchor, Chris Cuomo, terminated following allegations he tried to assist his brother, former New York Governor Andrew Cuomo, after he was hit with sexual misconduct allegations. The former anchor, though, now facing a sexual misconduct allegation of his own. NBC News correspondent Vaughn Hilliard has the latest.
Tonight, the Cuomo brothers' fallout continues. CNN anchor Chris Cuomo fired this weekend after allegedly helping his brother, the now former governor of New York, try to fend off sexual harassment accusations. And on Monday afternoon, Cuomo saying he will no longer host his Sirius XM radio show either, writing in a statement, "Well, I have a thick skin. I also have a family for whom the past week has been extraordinarily difficult. So right now, I have to take a step back and focus on what comes next." This after prominent lawyer Deborah Katz came forward over the weekend, saying she represented a client who is alleging Chris Cuomo himself engaged in, quote, serious sexual misconduct. Katz writing in a statement that she made CNN aware of her client's story last week. 3 days later, CNN fired their star primetime anchor. It's unclear whether this accusation played into Cuomo's firing.
CNN has had cause to terminate Chris Cuomo for a long time, certainly since the revelations came about last Monday.
Katz saying her client wishes to remain anonymous, though she was ready to cooperate with CNN's investigators if needed. Katz this year has also represented Charlotte Bennett, one of Andrew Cuomo's former aides who alleged sexual harassment by the former governor. Chris Cuomo has yet to directly address the accusation of sexual misconduct against him, but a spokesman for Cuomo telling NBC in part, these apparently anonymous allegations are not true. Cuomo wrote in a tweet after his termination from CNN, "This is not how I want my time at CNN to end, but I have already told you why and how I helped my brother."
Obviously, I'm aware of what's going on with my brother. And obviously, I cannot cover it because he is my brother.
CNN President Jeff Zucker, Cuomo's boss, also ensnared in the scandal now. The Wall Street Journal reporting that a spokesperson for Cuomo texted them, quote, "They were widely known to be extremely close and in regular contact, including about the details of Mr. Cuomo's support for his brother. There were no secrets about this." CNN responding, "We are disappointed with Chris's statement. He has made a number of accusations that are patently false. This reinforces why he was terminated for violating our standards and practices, as well as his lack of candor." CNN first suspended Cuomo last Tuesday after the New York Attorney General revealed documents that allegedly showed the anchor offering to help his brother as he faced reports of sexual misconduct, even offering to reach out to other journalists. Andrew Cuomo resigned as governor in August and has denied any wrongdoing. The Cuomo brothers appearing frequently together at the height of the pandemic on CNN's air. Now, accountability and apparent repercussions for both.
Federal damage that this scandal does to legitimate journalists and legitimate journalism is major. We're all under such scrutiny, much public contempt, the whole perception of, air quotes, fake news, that the last thing we want to do is make a grievous mistake of our own, have an unforced error of our own on journalistic ethics like this one.
All right, Vaughn Hilliard joins us now live on set. So, Vaughn, it sounds like these two investigations sort of collided. The investigation into how he helped his brother while he was an anchor at CNN, but now this new allegation of sexual misconduct against Chris Cuomo. Chris has been at CNN for nearly a decade. Do we know why these sexual misconduct allegations against him are surfacing right now?
Deborah Katz, the attorney of this woman who is bringing this sexual misconduct allegation against Chris Cuomo, brought it 2 days after the New York Attorney General revealed those documents to show the extent to which Chris Cuomo was involved in his brother's response to his own allegations here. And it was the attorney who said that her client wanted to come forward because out of frustration of the way in which Chris Cuomo came out and defended his brother against those very allegations, and said it was important for her to share her story. Again, we know very little about her actual misconduct allegation, but we do know that it was this very next weekend in which CNN ultimately terminated him.
All right, Vaughn Hilliard with all those new details. Vaughn, we thank you for that. When we come back, the crisis in the Americas, hunger across Latin America and the Caribbean at its worst level in decades. Tonight, Top Story goes inside one of the countries hit the hardest. And remembering Bob Dole, the special honor just announced for the longtime Republican lawmaker following his death at 98. That's next. All right, now to Top Story's news feed. A violent gang in Haiti has released 3 more kidnapped missionaries. Their Ohio-based Christian group says they are safe and appear to be in good spirits. 2 others released last month, but 12 hostages remain. The 17 missionaries, including an 8-month-old baby, were kidnapped in mid-October. The gang initially demanded $1 million per person for their release. Hawaii has declared a state of emergency as forecasters warn of potentially catastrophic flooding. Heavy rain drenching Maui as a storm system moves across the Hawaiian Islands. Landslides and flash flooding possible. High wind warnings and a rare blizzard warning also in effect in some of those areas. In the Midwest, several tornadoes touching down, including one that sent this RV flying into a school bus. Luckily, no students were on board at the time and no serious injuries have been reported. Former Senator and presidential candidate Bob Dole will lie in state at the U.S. Capitol Rotunda. The Republican lawmaker who represented Kansas for more than 30 years in both chambers of Congress died on Sunday at the age of 98. In February, the World War II veteran announced a stage 4 lung cancer diagnosis. A formal ceremony will be held in the Rotunda on Thursday. It will not be open to the public due to the pandemic. And we continue our coverage on the pandemic. We turn to Europe, where violent clashes erupted as thousands of people protested COVID-19 restrictions. NBC's Matt Bradley has that story.
From Belgium to Spain, protests erupted across Europe over the weekend in response to new and reimposed COVID-19 restrictions. In Brussels, the protests turned violent, with police using tear gas and water cannons on demonstrators that appeared to toss cobblestones and fireworks at them. The capital was filled with people protesting COVID-19 certificates needed to access bars and restaurants, and the implementation of mandatory mask wearing for most primary school children.
I am a natural being, and I want to choose over my own body and my own free will, and that's why I'm here.
Tens of thousands of protesters across the continent came out to march and demonstrate against the COVID restrictions in their countries. Last month, Austria became the first country in Western Europe to reimpose a full COVID-19 lockdown. But still, more than 40,000 people came out this weekend to protest these measures.
I'm here because I'm against forced vaccinations. I'm for human rights, and the violation of human rights should be stopped.
And in Spain, thousands of protesters took to the streets of Barcelona to protest COVID-19 certificates showing proof of vaccination, a negative test, or a COVID recovery in the last 6 months. Those are now required to enter bars, restaurants, gyms, and care homes. Europe on edge, perhaps even more so than the U.S., where only a limited number of cities have such restrictions. All this as the world looks ahead to what the Omicron variant might bring. Matt Bradley, NBC News, London.
All right, we thank Matt for that. Now to top stories Global Watch, and we begin with the deadly volcanic eruption in Indonesia. The volcano in East Java active again today after a powerful eruption over the weekend left at least 20 people dead. Rescue workers digging through hot ash and debris to find any survivors. Dozens of people remain missing and thousands of homes are destroyed. Myanmar's ousted leader has been sentenced to 2 years in prison. The 76-year-old Nobel Prize winner, found guilty of inciting and breaking COVID-19 violations. She was removed and detained during the country's coup last year. Her sentence was reduced from 4 years, but she still faces up to 100 years behind bars for other charges. U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken called the convictions an affront to democracy and justice. And superstar K-pop band BTS says they are taking a hiatus. The group announced it will be taking an extended period of rest following their final U.S. shows this month. The band saying the break is needed to get re-inspired and recharged, but it's unclear how long it will be. It's their second hiatus since 2019. All right, we want to turn now to the Americas, a look at the stories coming out of the U.S. and across Latin America. Tonight, a report by the UN signaling an alarming trend, hunger reaching its highest rate in 2 decades in Latin America and the Caribbean. For some countries, COVID-19 adding to already unstable economies. NBC's Isa Gutierrez takes us to Venezuela, one of the countries that's been hit the hardest.
Deep inside the capital of Venezuela, the last 2 years have been devastating. A global pandemic threatening an already dire situation. With medicine, water, power, and fuel shortages, the virus was not the only thing Venezuelans feared. It's what came as a result: hunger.
Yo por lo menos yo tengo 5 muchachos. Y eso no me alcanza a mí para nada.
Every day, Jefferson Gallegos and his wife ask themselves how they will feed their family. Years ago, when he says things were good in Venezuela, Gallegos worked for a national TV network. Today, he takes any job he can get, from working as a construction worker to teaching gym classes and unloading trucks.
Cualquier cosa que me llame, yo le echo pichón.
When there's work, there's food. But when there isn't, mom and dad sacrifice the little they have.
Cuando no teníamos trabajo ni uno de los dos, llegó el momento que en ese momento ya mi hija ya había nacido y nosotros dejábamos de comer para comprarle la leche a la niña.
In the last year of the pandemic, Venezuela's poverty rate increased by about 9%, according to a recent study. Around 3 out of every 4 Venezuelans now live in extreme poverty. But this isn't just happening here. Hunger is spreading like a virus across Latin America and the Caribbean. A new report by the UN found more than 59 million people in the region are going hungry. That's an increase of more than 13 million people in just 1 year. The hardest hit countries being Haiti, Nicaragua, Honduras, Bolivia, Ecuador, and Guatemala. And while the pandemic has had deep economic and social impacts, experts say the hardest hit groups today faced these issues long before the virus came along.
The more poorer families with less resources, but also the indigenous groups and Afro-descendant groups as well. So they're usually the most marginalized, and they're also impacted worse by this situation.
Maike Arts is UNICEF's regional advisor on child survival in Latin America and the Caribbean.
What is important is to prioritize the most vulnerable groups. They had more difficult to access healthy foods than before the pandemic. And that's mostly because they don't have enough money to buy the foods, and also the fear of getting COVID.
The UN is calling the hunger increase the, quote, most pronounced in relation to other regions.
Are you concerned at all that this increase in poverty and hunger that was brought on in just the span of a year is something that's going to have lasting impacts for far longer than a year or 2 or 3?
Yes, unfortunately, when children are growing, and then when there is something that hampers their growth, it can have a long-lasting impact. And we're concerned about that.
With COVID-19 and variants still posing a threat around the world, Gallegos and his family know this trip to the market is a blessing they're not taking for granted. Isa Gutierrez, NBC News.
All right, we thank Isa for that report. Coming up, American radicalized, the Georgia woman who went from not caring about politics to dying at the Capitol insurrection. Ayman Mohyeldin joins Top Story. He's in the house tonight with how she ended up in Washington on January 6th and the QAnon conspiracies that helped get her there. Stay with us. That story coming up. All right, back now with the story of Rosanne Boylan, one of 5 people who died during the January 6th insurrection. The Georgia native who family said at one time didn't even care about politics, consumed by QAnon conspiracy theories. Tonight, the isolation from her loved ones that followed and how she ended up on the Capitol steps on that fateful day in January, the day she would lose her life. Ayman Mohyeldin has a story of her transformation into an American radical.
For most of her life, Rosanne Boylan hated politics. She was shy and she rarely left her home.
She was super involved in her family. You know, we come from a large Catholic family, so we're always in each other's business. We're always hanging out.
In the summer of 2020, though, her family started to notice that something seemed a bit off.
She started getting a little bit closed off and distant, and like on Christmas she was here, but she was just on her phone the whole time. She wasn't participating in the opening of presents.
Rosanne began to withdraw from family commitments and instead started going down a QAnon rabbit hole of child trafficking conspiracy theories.
And she was like, hey, have you heard about this? And I was like, no. So she researched it. So I left there at probably 5 o'clock in the evening, and she texted me at 7 o'clock in the morning. She had been up all night watching YouTube.
Her family wasn't sure how to handle her newfound obsession. Rosanne had a history of substance abuse, and they were afraid confronting her might push her away. Her social media posts began to take on an extreme political tone.
Do you believe that Rosanne was radicalized?
Yes. Yeah.
Her family tried to talk her out of attending the January 6th rally held in Washington, but she refused. She went to the rally with a friend, Justin Winchell, who had been one of the last people to see her alive. Her family watched in horror as the events of that day unfolded.
So we just watched the news, and the second that they said the second person died, there was more than one death, I knew automatically that it was her. Just had this gut, feeling that was her.
Late that night, Rosanne's family got the call that they had been dreading. Rosanne had died at the Capitol in the middle of a crowd trying to force its way past the police line. Body cam and other footage from that day paints a brutal picture. Her friend Justin Winchell, who accompanied her to the march, can be seen in this footage, dragging people out of the way in an apparent attempt to save his friend's life.
Save her! She's gonna die! She's gonna die!
Roseanne died, but according to the medical examiner's office, it was because of a prescription drug overdose.
So do you believe that the explanation that was given by the medical examiner as to why Roseanne died is not
prescription Adderall? Prescription Adderall?
I think that they did a rush, half-hearted investigation because she was a Trump supporter who died doing what she did.
In the months since her death, the Boylans have sought to understand how Roseanne was radicalized and what exactly happened to her in those final minutes, some of which they believe were captured on body cam video that has not been released. They also want to speak to Justin Winchell, who was with her at the end, but he has stopped returning the family's calls and texts.
Ultimately, we just want to find out what happened to her.
All right, Ayman Mohideen joins us now live in studio. And I guess, Ayman, one of the things that stands out for me is how fast this transformation happened, right? You have someone who's not into politics to suddenly being under the spell of QAnon. How'd that happen so fast?
Yeah, and that's what surprised the family when they reached out to me to tell this story, because they were shocked by it as well. And it begins with, your introductory into QAnon. And it's something sometimes very benign, a hashtag Save the Children that gets you to watch one video and then another video. And before you know it, you're spending your time, hours at a time, watching video after video, reading theory, conspiracy theory after conspiracy theory. And that's what happened with this young woman. She started in the span literally of one day in the summer of 2020. She spent 14 hours one evening from, sunset till sunrise the next morning, just watching YouTube videos, as you saw there from that video. And when she woke up the next morning, she was totally convinced that there was some secret cabal out there that was involved in pedophilia. And she even shared it with her sister. And her sister kind of shrugged it off, saying, like, this sounds crazy. But for Roseanne, it was an entry point into QAnon, and it led from one conspiracy theory to the other until she became an ardent Trump supporter on the steps of the Capitol.
It literally almost happened like in one day, which is kind of wild. Real quick, because I know this is important to the family. They think authorities have botched the investigation into how she died?
Yeah, they think that they are not doing a full investigation into the final minutes of her life. As you could see from the video, she was under a pile of people. The official autopsy said it was as a result of amphetamine intoxication. But she didn't have any street drugs in her system. She had prescribed Adderall. And so, Adderall. Yeah. And so they're raising questions right now, trying to obtain more body cam video from the police, but also questioning as to whether or not the autopsy was done, taking into consideration the chaotic environment and dangerous environment that she was in.
You think about all the families connected to January 6th and how this has affected so many more lives than just the people on the Capitol steps. Ayman, thank you so much. And you can catch the entire story of Roseanne Boylan on MSNBC's newest original podcast series, American Radical, wherever you get your podcasts. Episode 1 just dropped. All right, when we come back, dancing again, the Wisconsin dance troupe performing for the first time since losing multiple members in the deadly parade rampage. What they told us about their emotional return and the friends they're honoring. Stay with us. Finally tonight, a story of remarkable resilience. The Dancing Grannies making an emotional return, marching in a Christmas parade just 2 weeks after enduring an unspeakable tragedy. The troupe making good on their promise to keep on dancing. For decades, the Milwaukee Dancing Grannies have made fans all across Wisconsin smile. But just 2 weeks ago, the dance troupe made headlines all over the country in a way no one could have imagined.
It just swerved in the other direction and just hit as many people as it could.
I sat down with some of the members after that tragic day in Waukesha. 3 of their members killed in the parade rampage, along with the husband of another member. Their emotions were raw, but their determination to carry on the legacies of those they lost was unmistakable.
I think what I would like is for everyone to remember how much joy they brought to everyone, how much they taught us, how much they taught us to enjoy dancing and being together and being a family. I know we're going to continue going on. It might take us a year to pull back and get some more people to join, but I know in our hearts we're going to continue.
And continue they did. The Dancing Grannies making their first appearance since that tragedy, this time at the Franklin, Wisconsin Christmas Parade, the city's first ever.
It was the starting of healing.
The women and their families walking arm in arm, sporting custom-made blue sweatshirts. On the back of each one, in loving memory of Ginny, Lee, Tamara, and Bill, and the marching orders, keep on dancing.
I think they would be pretty proud of us to be doing this. Ginny and Lee were the glue that kept us together. We're trying to honor them and keep the Grannies going for the future.
The grandmas carrying a banner like they did in Waukesha, but added to this one a broken heart, a symbol of their loss, and a reminder of why they dance.
They'll always be with us. And I really think the banner needs to also be in the parade. We're doing this for them because that is what they would want. They would be angry if we just didn't do anything anymore.
Some members still recovering from physical injuries, unable to march, all of them still reeling from the trauma and grief of that day. But even in the face of profound and personal loss, the Grannies, with their bravery and resilience, bringing smiles to the faces of all in attendance.
I think that strength just means that they just feel like walking in honor is exactly what those people would want them to do, is not stop and just continue doing what they love.
It brings joy that we are bringing so much joy to people. I didn't realize that. Seeing the people clapping and the signs brought tears to my eyes. It was to me like a Granny parade for us.
The dancing Grannies dancing again. Thanks so much for watching Top Story on this Monday. I'm Tom Llamas in New York. I'll see you right back here tomorrow. Good night.
Thanks for watching our YouTube channel. Follow today's top stories and breaking news by downloading the NBC News app.